whoa, whoa, whoa! Ah! No!
Over 300 people have died on Mount Everest. That number alone is sobering. But the detail that truly unsettles climbers, the one whispered in base camps and thought about in silence, is this. Many of those who died are still there. Not buried, not recovered, still lying exactly where they fell, preserved by cold, visible to anyone who climbs past them. Imagine knowing a body is there, knowing their name, their story, their final decision, and still walking by. Everest is often described as the ultimate test of human endurance, but that description misses something deeper. This mountain doesn't just challenge strength or skill, it forces decisions most of us will never have to make. Decisions where compassion, survival, and responsibility collide in thin air. High on the mountain, above 8,000 meters, the world becomes brutally simple. Every step costs oxygen. Every delay drains life. And sometimes, the difference between going home and becoming part of the landscape is measured in minutes. That is why Everest has become what many quietly call an open-air cemetery. Among these silent figures is one climber so well known that he became a landmark. Climbers used him as a reference point, a warning, a reminder. His nickname was Green Boots. This is not a story about shock or spectacle. It's about the unspoken rules of survival, the moral weight of impossible choices, and why on Everest, leaving someone behind can sometimes be the only way anyone lives. You're watching Ben Stories, where we explore the human cost behind the world's most extreme places. To understand why bodies are left behind on Everest, you first have to understand what the mountain does to the human body and how quickly it strips away margin for error. Above 8,000 meters lies what climbers call the death zone. The air holds only a third of the oxygen found at sea level. Every breath feels incomplete. Muscles weaken. Judgment blurs. Simple tasks, clipping a carabiner, adjusting a glove, can take minutes instead of seconds. In this environment, the human body is not built to function. It is built to fail. Now imagine adding weight. A fully equipped climber already carries oxygen tanks, layers of insulation, ropes, food, and survival gear. Even under ideal conditions, forward progress is slow and exhausting. Retrieving a body means dragging or carrying an additional 70 to 90 kilograms across ice, rock, ladders, and near-vertical faces, often while fighting exhaustion, frostbite, and hypoxia. This is why many of the bodies on Everest didn't remain there by accident. They stayed because moving them was physically impossible. Take the area near the northeast ridge, where Green Boots lay for years in a shallow limestone alcove. The terrain there funnels wind like a corridor. Temperatures plunge. Climbers stop only briefly, long enough to recognize where they are, long enough to remember why no one lingers. Attempts to move bodies from similar elevations have required teams of 6, 8, sometimes 10 Sherpas, each placing themselves at extreme risk. Even then, success is far from guaranteed. In several documented recoveries, rescuers collapsed from exhaustion. Some had to abandon the effort halfway through to avoid becoming casualties themselves. Then there's the cost. A single recovery operation can exceed $70,000. Helicopters cannot safely operate at the highest elevations, meaning most of the work must be done by human strength alone. Specialized equipment, supplemental oxygen, multiple acclimatization rotations, and weeks of preparation are required. And even after all that, weather can erase the window of opportunity in hours. In recent years, particularly during the 2024 and 2025 seasons, Specialized teams have managed to retrieve a small number of bodies from lower sections of the mountain. These efforts are often highlighted as progress, but what they really reveal is how narrow the margin remains. Even with modern gear and experienced crews, every recovery is a gamble. There is another reality climbers rarely say out loud. Retrieving a body is often more dangerous than summiting. When someone collapses during an ascent, their teammates are already operating near their limits. Turning around means sacrificing oxygen, time, and strength needed to descend safely. Stopping too long, even with good intentions, can lead to altitude sickness, frostbite, or worse. Many climbers who died trying to help others did so because they stayed just a little too long. This is why the presence of visible bodies, including green boots for so many years, became grim navigation points. They marked places where the mountain had already won. They warned climbers, this is how far others made it. In 2025, a recovery attempt in the Khumbu icefall reinforced this truth. The terrain shifted. Ice blocks moved. Conditions changed faster than forecasts predicted. The team survived, but only after abandoning their original plan. The mountain decided what was possible. Everest doesn't negotiate, it doesn't compromise, and it doesn't care about intention. So when people ask, why didn't they bring them down? The answer isn't cruelty or indifference, it's arithmetic. Oxygen remaining versus oxygen needed. Strength left versus strength required. Lives already at risk versus lives that might be lost. On Everest, logistics aren't just planning details. They are moral boundaries enforced by altitude, weather, and gravity. And once those boundaries are crossed, the question stops being, can we bring them home? It becomes something far harder to answer. Should we try? That question, should we try, is where Everest's story shifts from physical limits to ethical ones. In most places in the world, leaving a body behind is unthinkable. Recovery is assumed. Closure is expected. The dead are brought home, no matter the cost. But Everest exists outside normal moral frameworks. Up high, the mountain imposes its own version of ethics, one built not on ideals but on survival. Mountaineers often speak of a principle that sounds simple on paper: do no harm. On Everest, that principle takes on a harsh interpretation. If attempting a recovery puts multiple lives at extreme risk, does proceeding become an act of harm rather than compassion? This question has followed every visible body on the mountain, but none more persistently than Green Boots. For years, climbers recognized him instantly. Slumped in his alcove, bright boots cutting through the white and gray landscape. Some paused to check if he had shifted. Others avoided looking altogether. Everyone understood what he represented. He was not just a fallen climber. He was a decision made over and over again by hundreds of people who passed him. After several failed recovery discussions in early 2025, debates intensified within the mountaineering community. Some argued that leaving known, identifiable climbers behind reduced them to objects, grim scenery in a place already heavy with loss. Others countered that risking Sherpa lives to recover bodies from the death zone was ethically indefensible. There is no consensus, and that may be the most honest outcome. Another perspective has gained quiet traction in recent years: the idea of Everest as a mountain cemetery. This view does not deny tragedy. It reframes it. The mountain, in this interpretation, becomes the final resting place for those who died pursuing it, a place no less sacred for being inhospitable. Supporters of this idea argue that removing bodies from extreme altitude violates the reality of where and how these climbers chose to push themselves. Green Boots, in this context, became something like a sentinel. Not a spectacle, but a marker of consequence. a reminder that ambition has limits and that crossing them comes with permanent costs. But this framing offers little comfort to families. For loved ones watching from afar, Everest's logic feels cold. Many families know exactly where their relatives lie. They've seen photographs, read accounts, heard climbers mention passing the body near the ridge or the climber by the cave. This visibility creates a unique kind of grief, one where the dead are not lost, but unreachable. Families of climbers who died in 2024 and 2025 have spoken publicly about this torment. Some wrestle with guilt for allowing the climb in the first place. Others feel anger toward the industry that markets Everest, while quietly accepting that some people will never come back. Many are torn between wanting recovery and fearing that someone else might die trying. Even climbers who survive are not untouched. Passing a body at altitude is not like encountering death elsewhere. There is no ceremony, no pause. You cannot stop long enough to grieve. Oxygen is running out. The wind is rising. The summit clock is ticking. You step around the body and keep moving, not because you don't care, but because stopping could mean joining them. Over time, this reality reshapes how climbers think. They internalize a code few outside the mountain fully understand. A code where intent matters less than outcome. Where survival sometimes demands choices that feel morally unbearable back at sea level. This is the ethical labyrinth of Everest. There are no clean answers, only trade-offs enforced by altitude and time. And standing at the center of that maze is a simple, brutal truth. The mountain does not allow heroism that costs extra lives. It only allows survival. To fully understand why those choices endure, you have to listen to the people who live closest to Everest. Not seasonally, but generationally. For Sherpas, the mountain is not a challenge to be conquered. It is a presence to be respected. Many Sherpa guides describe Everest not as hostile, but as indifferent. The mountain does not punish. It does not reward. It simply exists, operating by rules older than any expedition. Death on the mountain is not viewed as failure in the same way it often is in Western narratives. It is seen as a consequence of imbalance, of pushing beyond what the mountain allows on a given day. This perspective shapes how bodies on Everest are understood. In interviews conducted through 2025 and early 2026, Sherpa climbers spoke openly about the emotional complexity of recovery efforts. They understand the pain of families. They feel it deeply, but they also carry the memory of fellow Sherpas lost during rescue attempts. Men who died not chasing summits, but trying to save others. For them, figures like Green Boots are not objects of fear or morbid fascination. They are reminders, not warnings meant to scare, but lessons meant to be respected. That reverence contrasts sharply with how Everest is often portrayed elsewhere. In documentaries, social media clips, and promotional videos, the mountain is framed as a personal battlefield, a place where determination triumphs over nature. Death is implied, but rarely centered. Bodies are edited out. The costs are softened. The story becomes one of grit rather than consequence. On the mountain itself, that illusion doesn't last. Climbers speak of an unwritten rule that no one explicitly agrees to, but everyone eventually understands. Above a certain point, self-preservation overrides all other instincts. This rule is never taught in training courses. It is absorbed the first time you see someone sitting down too long, the first time you realize you don't have enough oxygen to help and survive. During the crowded 2025 season, this rule was tested repeatedly. Long lines formed near the summit. Turnaround times were missed. Exhausted climbers were forced to decide whether to assist struggling strangers or preserve their remaining strength for descent. In those moments, ideology disappears. What remains is arithmetic. Climbers who survive often describe a haunting clarity afterward. They replay the faces they passed, the moments they chose to keep moving. Many carry quiet guilt, not because they made the wrong decision, but because there was no right one available. And then, there are the newcomers. As Everest has become more accessible, more climbers arrive with limited high-altitude experience. Some are prepared. Many are not. They arrive with expectations shaped by filtered images and summit selfies, unaware that the mountain enforces consequences without exception. Seeing a body on the route shatters that illusion instantly. Green Boots did this for decades. Without speaking, without moving, he communicated what guide briefings could not. He made the abstract real. He reminded climbers that Everest does not distinguish between dreamers and experts when conditions turn. That is why, for many experienced climbers, removing every visible body is not necessarily an act of respect. In their view, it risks erasing the mountain's most honest lesson. Everest is not dangerous because people die there. People die there because it is dangerous. And no amount of storytelling can change that reality. What remains uncertain, what continues to divide climbers, families, and communities, is how much of that reality should be hidden, and how much should remain visible for those who choose to climb anyway. That question now shapes the future of the mountain itself. As Everest changes, so does the conversation around its dead. In recent years, attention has shifted toward technology, specifically whether innovation can finally solve a problem the mountain has resisted for decades. By 2026, several specialized high-altitude drone systems are being tested, designed to operate in thin air, extreme cold, and high winds. Some are capable of mapping routes with unprecedented precision. Others are being evaluated for limited transport tasks. On paper, the idea is compelling. Remove human risk. Use machines to do what bodies cannot. But Everest rarely cooperates with theory. Even the most advanced drones struggle in sustained winds. Batteries fail in cold. Payload limits remain low. And perhaps most importantly, technology cannot change the terrain itself. Vertical ice walls, shifting seracs, and narrow ridge lines where there is simply no room to maneuver. A machine may locate a body, but moving it safely down the mountain remains a challenge no circuit board can solve. This hasn't stopped the debate. As climbing permits increase and Everest becomes more crowded, pressure mounts to clean up the mountain. Not just trash, but bodies. Some argue that visible remains damage Everest's image and reduce human lives to cautionary props. Others worry that removing these figures sanitizes the experience, encouraging underprepared climbers to believe the mountain is safer than it is. Green Boots sits at the center of this tension. Though his body was eventually moved out of direct view, his presence still looms over every ethical discussion. He represents the question no one can answer definitively. When does respect mean retrieval? And when does it mean leaving things as they are? For some families, future technology offers hope. Hope that one day their loved ones can be brought home without risking others. For many Sherpas and veteran climbers, that hope is tempered by memory. They remember seasons when conditions shifted without warning, when plans collapsed, when recovery turned into rescue, and rescue turned into loss. There is also a quieter concern, rarely spoken aloud. If Everest becomes a place where every body is eventually removed, what changes in the climber's mind? Does the mountain feel less final? Less absolute? Does the knowledge that someone will come for you, no matter where you fall, alter decisions made high in the death zone? Some argue that permanence is part of Everest's honesty. The mountain does not promise forgiveness. It does not offer second chances. Its consequences are not hidden once the season ends. They remain, frozen into the landscape, asking a silent question of everyone who climbs past. Do you understand where you are? At the same time, ignoring the grief of families is not an option. Their pain is real. Their desire for closure is human. The fact that Everest cannot accommodate every form of compassion does not erase the need for it. So the debate continues between progress and preservation, between visibility and dignity, between remembrance and warning. Perhaps the most uncomfortable truth is this: no policy, no technology, and no consensus will ever resolve the tension completely. Because the problem is not logistical or ethical alone. It is existential. Everest forces humanity to confront the limits of control. It reminds us that some environments operate beyond our values, our systems, and our intentions. We can adapt. We can negotiate at the edges. But we cannot fully impose our will. The mountain decides what remains, and in doing so, it shapes its own legacy, one written not just in summits and records, but in the silent figures that once lay along the path, reminding climbers that ambition always carries a price. What remains is the question every climber must answer before they ever step onto the ice. Not whether the summit is worth it, but whether they truly accept what it might cost. High on Everest, ambition fades quickly. What remains is clarity. There is a moment every climber reaches, sometimes on the ascent, sometimes on the way down, when the mountain strips life to its essentials: oxygen, time, strength. In that space, values we take for granted at sea level begin to shift. Heroism looks different. Compassion takes on new forms. Survival becomes the quiet priority beneath every decision. The bodies left on Everest are not evidence of indifference. They are evidence of limits. They tell us that there are places on this planet where intention is not enough, where courage cannot override physics, and where even the deepest empathy must sometimes yield to reality. Figures like Green Boots are not there to haunt climbers. They remain as witnesses to the cost of ambition and the thin line between perseverance and peril. For families, the mountain's logic may never feel fair. For climbers, it becomes unavoidable. And for those watching from afar, it challenges a comfortable belief that with enough effort, every problem has a solution. Everest quietly argues otherwise. It reminds us that some environments demand humility above all else, that success is not measured only by how high you climb, but by whether you return. That wisdom sometimes means turning back, even when the goal is close enough to touch. And that is the lesson the mountain leaves behind, long after the stories end. On Everest, reaching the summit is optional. Coming back alive is not. Thank you for watching Ben's Stories. If these stories help you see the world and its extremes a little more clearly, you're always welcome here.